Hey Kevin, how are you?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, very good, thanks. How are you?
Cold, but yes, good.
Yeah,
In the office this morning.
it's cold but sunny here, so I'll take that at the moment.
Absolutely, any day. Yeah, so what we thought we'd talk about this week is the role of kind of visionary and the role of operator inside a kind of a growing business. In
Yeah,
that kind of, you've got to like 500,000 a turnover, you're trying to get to 2 or 3 million a turnover. How does that all work?
yeah. And should we just give a bit of background? The context of this is from the book. Actually, a few books: Get a Grip, Traction, Rocket Fuel is very good actually, which goes into the
Yes.
absolute split between visionary and integrator. I found that's the story is interesting the first time, but when you really want to kind of how do you implement this and make it work, I think the more factual Rocket Fuel is probably my favorite out of those three.
Yeah, and rocket fuel is very good, definitely yes. And that phrase they call them the integrator, which I thought was a really interesting way of positioning it. Was that you've got this visionary and then you've got the integrator.
Yeah.
But integrator, operator, call them what you will. But yeah, the integrator role it becomes critical. Do you want to talk about your experience? Have you scaled as you've scaled up your businesses in currently and in the past? What your
Yeah. There's something that I thought of very recently, which was so originally I grew an agency from 2006 as a SEO practitioner that had studied a bit of business, but really never ran a business. So I teamed up with a business partner who knew about business, but didn't know as much about SEO. And actually, I think in hindsight, I would have loved to have read the book at that point in time, because I remember we reached a point and I ended up leaving the company. And I think actually this wasn't the main reason, but it's probably one of the reasons. We had a meeting at one point where um, I set out, this is what I want to do in order for us to grow next year. And I feel like we'd stagnated a little bit, but this is how we get to the next level and what we should do. And I remember asking my business partner, what do you think we should do? Or where do you think you can add value in your role to move
yeah,
us forward? And I remember his reply was, well, I'll do the bits that you don't do. And I just remember thinking at the time, and probably years afterwards, I just thought that was a really bad answer. That it's just like, okay, well, he doesn't know what he's doing. And I think I've reflected back on that, and I actually think that was a good answer. I
yeah,
mean, I think the
exactly.
good answer, it's a good answer in the context of the visionary and the integrator role.
Yeah,
So there's a test that you can take. I don't know the exact address, but I'm sure we could put it in the show notes. And if it allows you to answer a series of questions and then tell you if you're a visionary or an integrator. And I did this in a group of about 8 people. I think as a percentage, I scored something like 92% on visionary, which was, I think the second highest was in the 70s or something. So I was
right.
clearly the strongest in the visionary. And on integrator, I don't remember my exact score, but I think it was certainly down in the 40s, if not lower. And that was by far out of that room the lowest on that. And there's some people that are kind of equally good at both, or maybe train themselves to be better at one or the other. Um, but yeah, I think in terms of my story, I've always been very clear that my strength is the visionary style. Where's the industry going? How do I build contacts? How do I get excited thinking 5, 10 years ahead?
Yeah,
When it comes to the day to day, I genuinely don't care. And I've got better things to worry about. But that said, it's not that it's better things to worry about. It's just using your strengths and weaknesses. And there's better people to deal with different things at different stages as well. So I think that's kind of the overview and the context of how I've seen that develop.
I mean, it's very interesting about the there's a reason, many reasons, why very few companies break through the million turnover. It's really simple.
Mhm.
Is that most companies, most entrepreneurs, most founders, they
Yeah.
start their own company. They don't often have a business partner, a true partner at the beginning. They normally start something because of a passion or because of a problem they found, but often it's on their own unless they've got kind of seed money of some kind.
Yeah.
And so what happens is they grow these companies, and then the founder is the seller, and the
Mhm.
founder is the visionary. Typically, I find that most companies that succeed, not all but most, the founder is the visionary and the salesperson, because that's how you build clients and that's how you build revenue. And then as you get towards that kind of 700K of turnover, the wheels start coming off because there's no integrator. And because the visionary by nature, as you've just said, your natural style is not to be the integrator or the operator. It just isn't your natural style. And so therefore, you're far more excited and interested by bringing in new business. And what happens is you get this, you bring in new business, there's no integrator sat behind you, you lose clients because you failed to deliver high quality service. So you bring in new clients and the cycle repeats. And so you just get this cycle. So you just churn a lot of clients because you can't scale.
I've definitely seen that, and someone else described this to me as you're running a bath with the plug open, and that's what happens. You end up winning, but you're also losing, and that means you're overall standing still, or just that growth is halted a lot. And I think that's the key thing of how do you keep everything moving forward whilst you're aligned with the longer term. You put this in good terms quite a while back when we were talking about the structure of our team. And I remember you were saying, Kevin, you focus on top line revenue. Chelsea at the time, who was MD, you focus on profitability. And then we had an operations manager. So you focus on doing great work for our clients and making sure that we're getting results. And between that, if we're delivering quality, we're making a profit as an agency, and we're on the right track for the long term. We're not just taking on stuff for the sake of it to make the numbers look good that month. Then actually we're going in the right direction, but we're not. I mean, I think I've mentioned this on podcasts before, but I think I've been guilty in the past of thinking 5 years ahead instead of 5 minutes ahead. And I think that it's, again, there's a place and time for absolutely everything, and it's trying to get all of that lined up as smoothly as possible. And it's not normally one person that can do all of that.
And interesting. So on this podcast and for our listeners, so I was running a program yesterday on negotiation skills training and procurement insights to 20 salespeople. Really good quality salespeople, great quality clients, high growth. And at the end of the procurement insights piece, which was like 25, 30 slides, I said to people, so any questions? And one of the salespeople said, yeah, I've got a question, Mike. I'm like, oh, what's that? They said, you've distilled 15 years experience into 25 slides. And I'm at the starting post and you're near the end. How on earth am I going to consume all of this information you've given me? What am I going to do with it? And it's the same problem with the visionary, is that if you think 5 years ahead, you're way ahead of your team. You're massively ahead of your team. Mm. And so you end up with this disconnect between the 5-year vision and where we're going and the kind of the trailblazer and this team that's sat there delivering a day-to-day client going, I can't relate to it, Kevin. It's too far away and it's too big. What do I do? And the reason I relate yesterday's story is I said to this guy, it's very simple. Start with, on this slide, there's this step-by-step process. Just do that. Don't do anything else. Just do that. Mm-hmm. When you get that right, go back and look at the pack and then do this thing.
Yeah.
And he went, okay. And that in that moment, it was like I've connected this big topic with 15 years experience into a tomorrow morning when you get up and you get that problem, look at this slide.
Yeah. Yeah.
And teams need the same thing. The visionary's got to be able to connect the future with what do I do tomorrow morning?
Yeah, exactly. And it's definitely trying to pull it back into, if you have to communicate with the team, but also relate it to them. So it's no good me saying, I want us to get to 10 million turnover by X and we want to win these type of clients X, Y, Z. I mean, that could be quite exciting, but
Kevin, sounds brilliant, but what do I do tomorrow morning?
Yeah, what do I do differently? How is that going to change? And actually then if you can turn that into, okay, well, these are the types of clients that we want to work with, or this is the type of thought leadership we want to put out there to attract the right type of, that's where it becomes more actionable. And it's not just about, again, it's kind of like, it's the difference between, I guess, a wish and trying to turn that into an action plan and making it happen.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. And to your point, I think just knowing where to start is
exactly. Because I mean, the Chinese weren't wrong. You know, when they said every journey starts with a step. Yeah, they're correct. You know, we've got this. I've even forgot what my own phrase was, Kevin. We talk about this. If you don't have a vision, don't complain when you arrive somewhere you don't like.
Yeah, exactly. But you're right. It's every step of that journey. I relate a lot to running. So I've signed up to run the marathon, which obviously should have happened this year. It's now next year. And in order to run a marathon that I still haven't done yet, but my plan is not to get up one morning and run 26.2 miles. It's to get up one morning, not feel like doing it, but I'm going to put my running clothes on. I'm going to tie up my shoes, and I'm going to get out the door. And then I'm going to, it's literally is step by step. And quite often, if I go out for what should be a half an hour run, it might turn into an hour. And then bit by bit, that 5K becomes a 10K, becomes a half marathon, etc. And it's how do you build upon that? And I think actually one of the important steps here that probably connects that integrator and visionary, I think, is how do you appreciate and celebrate the milestones in between of you're getting towards that vision and this is working. Because I do think there can be an underappreciation for that integrator role, and it's very important to bring it together because it's the behind the scenes, not looking for the limelight style. I'm just going to get on with stuff and make everything happen. And I do think there's just a natural tendency to think that's not as important, whereas in actual fact, that's what makes things run like clockwork.
Do you remember, cast your mind back, I think it was about a year, maybe. We were sat in your boardroom in the office, and we were talking about, okay, so how do we get the team focused? Because we went through this kind of massive change. And we said, I think collectively we came to the conclusion of, look, there are three things, and they are in priority order: excellence, retention, and growth.
Yeah.
You do great work, we'll retain clients. If we retain clients, they'll refer us and we'll grow.
Yeah.
And that mantra we kind of stuck by.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
And it's really worked.
Yeah. And it comes back to retention is growth, especially when you've seen the model where growth when you're not retaining is not growth.
Yeah, exactly. Correct. And so I think, again, this kind of role of the visionary, the danger is if you're just the visionary and you can't get the team to do the way we're going to get to this vision is deliver excellent work. That will mean that we retain our clients, and that means they'll refer us and we'll grow, and that will get us towards our vision. If you can't do that, then you'll just be a visionary with no business.
Yeah, and I think maybe to put it into context for some of the listeners, I think some of the more famous examples would be Steve Jobs and I forgot Wozniak's first name now. I can't even remember. Yeah, it's Steve. Yeah, you're right. But again, it's like Wozniak is clearly the lesser known.
Yes.
But without him, I would imagine Steve Jobs would be a disaster.
Exactly.
So, but likewise, on the flip side, without Steve Jobs, Wozniak would not have created Apple computers and had that vision. So
it's quite interesting watching their film, because Jobs, the way the film was portrayed, basically they kind of, they fell out. So this is a very interesting point. So you mentioned Jobs and Wozniak. I wrote down Larry Ellison and Ray Lane back in the late 90s. Same thing. Yeah. Larry Ellison was the visionary, massive visionary, cloud computing, all sorts of stuff at Oracle. And then they brought Ray Lane in, and Ray Lane was brought in to make the trains run on time.
Yeah.
And it was very successful for a few years, and then they fell out. So the challenge here for everyone is having a visionary and an integrator is great, but getting the chemistry right between the two of them is really challenging.
One thing I've seen as a trend is with big companies like that, there's a tendency of when the visionary departs, they're replaced by a financial person. And I think that's kind of because people are then thinking about short-term gains. How do we maximize profit? And I think that's quite a risk. Certainly when you look at the companies that are on their kind of second generation of leadership, Apple is a good example of Tim Cook, I think, is from a financial FD style CFO background.
Right.
And at least
Blair and Brown. Look at the difference between Tony Blair and Brown. When Brown,
yeah, and I think that's the thing of actually in short-term gains. I think you can find that, but if you look back at how much innovation has there really been over the last 5 years from the likes of Apple, Google, Facebook, I feel like they've really slowed, and I think a lot of it is they've had a lot of it now comes through acquisition, and the Apple iPhone, whatever number we're on now, is slightly better than I mean, it's not going to get worse, is it? But it's definitely not innovating in the same way that
absolutely
in the past. And I think a lot of those companies, maybe at a certain size, they play safe. And I think actually when they're really thriving is when they have that right balance between visionary and integrator to make, kind of like that longer term vision work. And I think there's a risk that by playing safe, someone else could come and overtake them by taking those risks and having a more clearer vision about what the future looks like and going for it.
And also the acceptance, Kevin. I think it's important that, and a lot can be said probably about our relationship, is that the acceptance is that we both accept we've got very different skills and very different perspectives. Mm-hmm. But because we've been around quite a bit in business, there's no competition. Yeah. It's not like I'm trying to be the bigger, better, more experienced person. You're not trying to be the more visionary, engaging, sales-oriented person. It's like you're just doing what you do, and I'm doing what I do. And we found a way of getting on whereby we don't compete, and there's no judgment. Is that you'll ask me a question about something like you did this morning, and I'll ask you a question, mm-hmm. and it's like that lack of competition is critical, because if one thinks they work for the other, like if the integrator thinks they are subservient to the visionary, and that's what happened with Ray Lane and Larry Ellison. I think, from what I can read, Ray Lane started to think, well, hang on a minute, I'm running the business.
Yeah.
So why do we need Larry Ellison? Mm-hmm. And you get that tension. And that is really hard to manage, I would say. And you've had that in your businesses. I've seen it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just, for me, some of the things maybe come down to even like the equity split of what's fair, what's right. And it's like everyone feeling that they're a part of it and how do they move forward. And again, I wouldn't say there's a fair equity split between a visionary and an integrator. You kind of have to look at those roles and what the people bring. But I think
that when they arrived, if you started the company as a visionary and you own all the equity, and 5 years in you bring in an integrator, well, they don't deserve half the company because you.
No, exactly. I think that makes sense. But yeah, I do think those pieces are really important, and obviously you can build that out as you grow in terms of operations. And normally in the early stage, like you were alluding to in terms of my role, it's quite biz dev focused. And I think in the true definition of visionary, it's kind of you're more focused around, I think there's 3 key things. It's kind of the vision of where you want to be, maybe your positioning around that, the financial performance of the company, and just making sure that, again, like you're at a overall level performing in the way that you should be, and then the culture of the team and making sure that you've got the right team in place, you're managing them and bringing people in and holding them to account against your values. And then everything else is kind of more developed by maybe different scorecards. And as you look into the EOS model, you've got responsibility and accountability for different functions, whether that's sales, marketing, HR, operations. It's bringing that under one roof. But I don't think any company starts with a visionary in the true sense of the role, because you have to wear all of these different hats, and
you do
then figure out which ones to pass on to other people and delegate as you grow.
I mean, interesting. I've kind of written down in just one of my kind of my notes is, can you find a visionary and an integrator in one role? Yeah, you can find those people.
Yeah.
But what I suspect is they won't be deep in either of them. They'll be capable in both, but they won't be deep in either. And that I think is a challenge for early stage companies is you actually do need to have someone who's got like I think you're an amazing visionary and an opinion leader, and that's been proven. You speak at conferences, you're well respected in your industry, and so your natural tendency is to be externally focused, thinking about the future, thinking about how the industry changes. You can do the integrated stuff because you've had to, because as you say, you've got no choice at the beginning, but it's not your natural style, and it's not something that you want to do every day and get up out of bed and do that.
I know it will drain me. I will do it as I probably call it a necessary evil of like, I have to do it. But yeah, I think in terms of what excites me, it's definitely thinking longer term. And I think that's the key. Like you're saying, if there's someone that is good at both, I think you probably do have to reach a point at a certain stage of you need to pick one to go with. And then how do you pair that with someone that's stronger at your weakness? But it's you'll probably get further alone if you're a good mix in the early stages, but then not as far unless you divide and conquer a little bit.
And so on that point, one of my tips, one of my takeaways is you need to build cash reserves for a number of reasons, but you need to build a pot, and let's call it the integrator pot. Is as you build your company, you need to squirrel away enough money so that you can afford to employ an integrator at some point.
Yeah.
Because what will happen is if you don't do that, you'll just keep on running, and you won't be able to ever to afford to bring in an integrator because it's seen to be a kind of cost to the business, rather than a huge benefit to the business. Mm-hmm. Therefore, you have to. I think it takes probably 6 months. To get that person to be effective and generating effectively their own salary in company benefits. It takes time. It's about systems, it's about processes. You get churn in the staff because people don't like the fact that we're now turning into a more organized, disciplined organization. All that has cost. You've got to kind of get through that with enough cash to say, I can see on the other side how much better it's going to be and how it will now allow us to meet our vision. That's the hard part.
Yeah, no, I think it is. And I think something else that you helped us with ages ago was job titles. And I've never been that concerned about job titles, but also I have a bias of I do run a company and can give myself any job title I like, I guess. But I think one thing that we did is we made a split between making myself the CEO and at the time making Chelsea the MD. And the reason for that was much more the internal language, probably a lot more than it was the external, because then the team knows who do they report into on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly.
And my role externally is very clear that it's not that I'm not involved in the business, I absolutely am, but I'm more externally facing as opposed to internally. And I think that's the key thing. And I think, again, maybe as you grow and get bigger, that's where you might have an operations manager or an ops director underneath that as well. But I think being clear on those roles and responsibilities, as a generalization, I think typically an operations person can probably step up into that integrator role over time. And it's probably the best way to have them in there initially, and then they can take that step up as you grow, and then they're more ingrained into the company. Whereas if it's an outside person, it does feel like quite a risk to bring in an integrator from day one. And
that's a great tip, actually. It's a great tip. Is recruiting as an ops manager, but recruit the person that fits the integrator profile. Yeah,
exactly right. I think from personal experience, I think that works better. And it doesn't disrupt the team, and actually it's rewarding. I think that you give those opportunities for growth.
So what's the summary, Kevin? What's your kind of like your top tip? What would someone do tomorrow?
Take the test. I think that would be my tip. My tip. And again, we'll find a way to share this as show notes because I think it's very good. But the first step is to realize, are you a visionary or are you an integrator? And if you are somewhere in the middle, maybe try and think hard about it. I know someone that did score in the middle, and he told me that he scored in the middle because maybe like me and to a certain extent needed, and definitely more so than me, needed to understand both, so had trained himself to be almost equally as good at both.
Right.
But when he really thought about what empowers him, what excites him versus what drains him a little bit, it was okay. Well, a visionary is where I would like to be longer term. So I think that's the first step, and from there, the pieces start to come together, and then you can build.
That's definitely a great first step. I mean, I think mine would be 2 parts. Make sure you've got a vision. So sit down, clarify a vision. Where are you going? If you're the founder, the owner, what is your vision? Where are you going? Check you've actually got one.
Yep.
And then secondly, look at the way that you manage the cash in your business and reduce your owner's drawings and owner's salary and start to put it into a pot for investing in growth. Because if you don't invest in growth through having cash reserves, you'll find it almost impossible to grow without risking the business. It'll just fall over.
Yeah.
Run out of working capital.
Yeah.
But that's my financial rational head talking. It's why we get along so well, Kevin, because we look at it from different perspectives. It's really good.
Yeah, no, and that's the whole point of this. It's building those different perspectives and skill sets together in a way that, I always refer to you as you ask me the questions that I wouldn't know to ask.
Yeah.
and that's why it works, because otherwise it's you don't know what you don't know.
That's very well put. Thanks, Kevin. Really enjoyed this one. It's very good indeed. All right.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mike.